Hello, I'm Mockingjay, and I'm going to be doing the archery activity for you today. I'm one of Camp Cedar Brook's archery instructors. I'm actually the archery coordinator, which means I'm responsible for the setup, maintenance of the equipment, scorekeeping, running the archery range, all the things that go into keeping archery going as a camp program as it's been for the past 20 years. I'm also certified level 1 archery instructor with USA Archery, which we require to have a certified instructor during each archery activity to make sure that there's somebody on the line who understands what needs to happen to keep the archery range a safe place for kids to have fun. So today we're going to be going over some of the things that we do at camp, and then also some ways that you can also do archery at home with the equipment that you have. So let's get into it. Alright, so some of what we're going to be looking at is how the range typically works at camp. So that includes how we select equipment for kids, which is the eye dominance test. Some of the safety rules on the range. We take safety very seriously at camp because we are teaching kids how to use a weapon, so it's very important that those rules are followed. We're also going to be looking at some of the equipment parts. We teach the kids a lot about the knowledge of archery and the parts of the bow, parts of the arrow, so we'll go over that. They actually normally have a test on Thursdays that they have to take just so we can see how much they understand, and it also determines whether they move up to a different level between beginner or advanced archery. The test is a big part of that. Not only are we going to look at some of the things we do at camp, we're also going to talk about setting up a range, how you can do that at home, how that's done at camp. We're also going to go over the steps of shooting. I'm going to do a little bit of a demo of how to shoot, and then we'll look at how to score, how to take arrows out of a target, and any other facts that you'll need to know about archery, whether it's at camp or doing it at home. So let's get in. So as some of the campers know, we have a general routine for the archery activity where on Monday we introduce them to a lot of the things I'm showing you in this video today, figure out the equipment they're going to use, teach them some basics of shooting. And then, as they grow more advanced, they might learn how to use a bow sight, figure out how to work on arrow groupings, and actually shoot using those techniques. We focus on getting points on Wednesday to see if they can move back. We keep yearly records for the past 20 years or so, so we have a lot of information on who our different archers have been and how they've been shooting. It's very helpful for our kilts. Then they prepare for the Bible study on Thursday and the test, so there's a lot of a focus on the things that they're learning and what they need to know. Thursday we use for the test and also the Bible study. So last year the Bible study focused on the theme verse. If we had had camp this year, we would have also focused on the theme verse and how that applies to archery and how the techniques we learn in archery also can be used in our walk with God. And then they'd be shooting for more points, and come Friday, if they've done well on the test, we really shoot for points. There might be a fun activity, maybe shooting at balloons, or water balloons are really fun. There's different things you can do. So we have a schedule that we try to follow with the campers and really focus on teaching them about the skill of archery, but also how to have fun, be safe, and learn about God. Alright, so for archery there's some basic equipment that you need whether you're shooting at camp or if you're doing archery at home. So the first thing you need is a bow. This is a recurve bow. There are also long bows, compound bows, and crossbows. But at camp we use the recurve bow. This is a takedown bow, so we can take it apart, store it in a box when it's not in use. And they're very good for kids to learn on. They learn the techniques, and it's good for shooting distances 15 to 40 yards with most of the bows we have. Another thing with equipment is that you also need arrows. So this is an arrow. You can see it has the fletching or the feathers here, and then it has the pile or the point on this end. These arrows are target arrows, so they're not designed for hunting, but they still can do some damage with the point if they were to hit a person or an animal. So one of the big things that we practice at camp is never aiming an arrow at another living being because it could do injury to them. So we have our bow and our arrow. The other things you need to shoot are a quiver of some sort. So there are ground quivers, which we use at camp. There are also quivers that can go on your hip or on your shoulder. Beyond that, there's also the target, which I talked about the target a little bit in the discussion on how to set up your range. And then, very importantly for a safety standpoint, is you need tackle. Tackle is your finger guard, which is worn on the hand that you draw the bow back with, and your arm guard, which is worn on the opposite arm. And it's very important that that protects the bend of your elbow, because if you're not careful, the string can hit you along the arm and it'll leave a lovely bruise. And if you don't wear a finger guard, the string or the feathers of the arrows can cut your fingers and make them bleed. So you always should be wearing tackle when you're shooting. If you're not wearing it correctly, it can result in injury. If you're not wearing it at all, it will result in injury. So tackle is very important. And that's an overview of the basic equipment you need. Alright, so we get a new camper who hasn't shot before, or a returning camper, and the first thing we have to figure out is what sort of equipment they need. And one way that we do that is the eye dominance test. So everyone is either right or left eye dominant, and using their dominant eye to shoot determines what type of bow they use, and also will determine what arm and hand their tackle goes onto. There are ways to shoot with both eyes open, but for an accuracy standpoint, it's easier for a camper to shoot with their dominant eye. Now their dominant eye is not connected to the dominant hand. I am right-handed, but I'm left eye dominant. So it's something that there's a little bit of a mental hurdle there sometimes that you have to work to getting over, that you can shoot just as well with either arm and hand in either position. It's more about which eye is dominant. So the really simple way to check your eye dominance is that you make a triangle and you look through it, and normally we have the camper look at our nose, and through that triangle the instructor will be able to see their dominant eye. So you can try that at home. You can do it with a sibling or family member and test what your eye dominance is. So once you've figured out whether you're right or left eye dominant, that will determine your bow. So this is a left eye dominant bow. The arrow rest, where the arrow goes when you're shooting, is on the right side. If I was a right eye dominant shooter, it would be on the left side. The other thing that's different is because I'm a left eye dominant shooter, I stand facing this way. The bow is in my right hand, and my finger guard and my drawing hand is the left hand, and I would pull back an arrow like this. If I were a right eye dominant shooter, I would turn around this way, and I'd use the opposite hand for drawing the bow, and the tackle would go on the opposite hand. So when we have campers shooting, we need to know that, because it also allows us to line the campers up in such a way that they don't run into each other. So eye dominance is one of the things that we start out with before we give anyone equipment. The other thing that we do is we check the draw weight. So this bow is a 25-pound bow. That means that when I pull it back, there's 25 pounds of draw force there. It's a little bit harder to pull back because I'm an adult. I can pull back something that's a little bit harder to draw. For campers, we have 15-pound bows, 20-pound bows, and we do have a few 25-pound bows that occasionally a camper needs to use. But depending on the bow they need, the eye dominance, and also how big the camper is, depends on the height of the bow. Some small bows have a very powerful draw weight. Some large bows have a weak draw weight. So it just depends on the individual archer what type of equipment they need to be able to shoot safely and accurately. Okay, so this is how you brace a bow, and this is really important to know because when you're not shooting, your bow shouldn't be kept strung normally. It puts too much stress on the limbs. So when you're not shooting, you'll want to take the string off. But more importantly, you have to know how to put the string on. This is called a bow stringer, one of the ways of bracing a bow. And what you do is you loop it on the tip on that end, and you put the other piece on the limb here. And then once that's set, you pull, and as you pull, you can slide up the string. And you just want it to go right into the other tip there. Then once you have your bow strung, you need to check that the string is straight. You can take off your bow stringer and you are ready to shoot. The other thing that you have to make sure when you're stringing is that your knocking bead lines up with your arrow rest. If you put the string on upside down, then your bead will be down here and you won't be able to shoot, and you'll have to restring your bow. And that is how you brace a bow. Alright, so I just talked to you about how to brace or string a bow and the importance of keeping it unstrung when it's not in use to prevent the stress from cracking the limbs. But what's also important is to regularly inspect your equipment, which is one of my responsibilities for the camp supply, to make sure that it's not damaged and it's safe for use. So some things you should be checking. You want to check the arrow rest. Make sure that it is not showing signs of any sort of tearing, that it's fallen off, that it's damaged in any way, otherwise that would need to be replaced. You also need to check the limbs of the bow, making sure there's no cracks in there, that the laminate is not splitting. If it's in too hot of a temperature, that can happen, which is why we have to store them in a cool area. And what's really important is checking your bowstring regularly. So checking the eye loops at the end, making sure that there's no fraying going on there. And most importantly, checking your nocking point, making sure that the arrow nock hasn't worn through the serving right next to the nocking bead. If that was frayed, you could potentially wear through your string, causing it to snap, which would cause serious injury to you as the archer if you were shooting it at the time. So strings have to be replaced fairly often. A bow, if it's well taken care of, if it's kept unstrung when it's not in use, if it's kept in good temperature conditions, not in bad weather, can last a very long time. So if you take good care of your equipment, then it will last you for years and years. So that's just some of the safety maintenance stuff that you need to be checking on your equipment if you have it at home. Alright, so when we're at camp, we generally have a range with about 4 targets with enough space for 8 to 12 archers, so 2 to 3 archers per target. And then we also have 2 to 3 staff on hand, one of those staff being certified as an archery instructor. So, if you were to decide to set up your own range at home, there's a few things you need to know. One is you'll need some sort of quiver for your arrows. This is a ground quiver, that's the type we use at camp. It holds the arrows, it also holds the bow for you. Never lay a bow on the ground, that's one of our safety rules. It risks the bow being stepped on or getting damaged from the damp on the ground if it were to be set on the ground. So, you need a safe place to keep your equipment here. It also makes it very easy when you're standing to be able to access all your equipment in one place. The next thing is figuring out where your target goes. So I've placed this target about 20 yards from my ground quiver. It's a good shooting distance. It's the distance that the advanced archers typically shoot at. And you can see this is a standard target size. It's the size that the kids learn to shoot on. You can shoot at smaller targets. I know Walmart carries some targets, even hunting targets, or as a worst case scenario, if you don't have anything, get a couple straw bales and a big piece of poster board, draw a target on there, color in the rings, and you have something that you can practice shooting at. Now, what becomes really important, you have the target, you have your distance to your range down there, but you also need plenty of space behind you if you don't have an adequate backstop. So we normally have a fabric curtain at camp, which will catch any arrows that go too far. Sometimes they do go into the woods though. That's why you need to have space behind your target. They recommend about 50 yards, that there is nothing that you could possibly damage. If you don't have adequate space for this, you should not be shooting your bow at home. So you can see there's no houses, no people, no cars there. So this is a safe area to shoot. If I were to overshoot, my arrow could go the full distance and just land in the grass or the woods somewhere. There's certain places you can't aim, so we can't shoot up in our field because there are houses and cars around. So you have to make sure that you have a safe range to shoot. If you don't, you might talk to a friend that has a field, or even if your church has a nice big sports field, getting permission to shoot there. But it's very important that you make sure that there are no people or objects that could possibly hit. Just like a gun, an arrow is a weapon and it can do serious damage. So you have to be very careful. When I'm shooting, I have to be careful because I have these little guys running around. So if one of them walks onto the range, I have to make sure that I stop shooting and shoo them out of the way before anything happens. So those are the basics of setting up a range. This is where I normally shoot, and it's a pretty good setup. You've probably heard me repeating the word safety a couple times. It's something we take very seriously at camp. We have a list of safety rules that talk about what we shoot, when we shoot, where we shoot, and how we shoot. Not only do we have those rules, which are things like don't aim at something that you don't want to hit, or don't put your equipment on the ground, don't talk on the firing line, as that can be distracting. There's some other safety things that you have to be aware of on the range. So I've talked about tackle, and that needs to be worn for the protection of the archer. There's also the maintenance of the bow and the arrows. So if something is damaged, you shouldn't be using it because that can result in an arrow flying the wrong direction or bow snapping, and that can cause injury as well. Another thing that becomes important at camp is that long hair needs to be pulled back, and if you're wearing any sort of jewelry, or in my case a lanyard, it has to be behind my neck when I'm shooting because it can get caught on the bowstring and pull your neck forward. Same thing goes for earrings, that can hurt you as well. Loose clothing is another thing that you don't want to wear, so you want to be wearing something that, again, the bowstring does not catch on, otherwise it can cause injury. Those are some of the things that the archer has to be aware of, but not only that, they have to be aware of where they're shooting. So you can see it's just empty space out there. There are no animals, people, anything that I could accidentally kill or injure or damage. It's not out there. And what we have at camp is a line and some signs that designate the range. So what I'm standing on is an invisible line called the firing line, and when there are people shooting, no one is allowed past that line. If I were to see somebody walking beyond that line, I would have to stop shooting, I'd have to ask the campers to stop shooting, and we'd have to wait until that person is out of the area. Even if it seems like it wouldn't be a likely place for someone to get hit, you still have to stop shooting because an arrow can fly off in an odd direction and still hurt somebody. Earlier you saw a very cool shot of the arrow hitting the target. That was done with a tripod that had a time release camera going, so there were no people there that could be injured. It's something that we have to be very aware of because if someone walks onto the range, they could be seriously injured. So safety is something very big at camp. It's probably one of the reasons why we seem very strict on the range, is because we have to be aware of not only the campers on the line and the staff, but anyone else or anything else that could be around. Alright, so now that we've gone over the steps of shooting, there's a few other things that an archer or a camper would need to know before they start to shoot. So at camp, because there's a large number of people and it's hard to hear one voice, we use whistle commands to tell archers when they can shoot, when they can't shoot, if there's a situation that is dangerous for people. We use whistle commands. So the commands are 2 whistle beeps for an archer to go up to the line. Then 1 whistle beep means that they can pick up their bow and start shooting. And then 3 whistle beeps means that after everyone's done shooting, they've been waiting quietly behind the line, then they can go out and get their arrows because no one else is shooting and the range is safe. In the case that something is going on, that maybe a person's walked onto a range, someone's injured, then there would be 5 or more beeps, which is the emergency signal, which tells the campers that they need to put their bow down. If there's an arrow on the bow, they need to take it off, put that away, and then step back away from the line and wait quietly until we give them further instructions. We've had to use the signal once or twice. One time we had the camp cat wander onto the range, and we had to use the emergency whistle signal so that no one would release an arrow and accidentally injure the cat. That includes, even if someone has it aimed perfectly at the bullseye, they have to stop shooting, because if that arrow were to fly, someone could get hurt. So I'm going to demo the whistle blasts for you and just show you the steps real quick that the campers would go through. And then after that, I'll talk a little bit more about a few more basic things you need to know, and then we'll be able to go ahead and fully demo the steps of shooting. So if I was a camper, I would be waiting behind the line, and I would hear 2 whistle blasts. That means that I can go to the line, I can take my stance, the firing line would be between my legs, and I would wait for the next signal. When that signal comes, the 1 whistle blast, I can pick up my bow, I can get an arrow, and I can start shooting. After I'm done shooting all my arrows, I would set my bow back down, I would wait quietly behind the line until everyone else is done shooting. Then, once everyone else is done shooting, the instructor would blow the whistle 3 times, and then I could go retrieve my arrows. Those are the whistle commands we use, and the campers learn them from day 1. We sometimes do drills with them where we throw in the wrong whistle command and see what happens and correct them on the whistle commands. It's something that they need to learn because each command means something specific. Not only do they learn the whistle commands, they also learn that they shoot with 6 arrows at a time. Those 6 arrows are called an end, and 5 groups of 6 arrows, so 30 arrows total, is a round. And that's what we use for scoring purposes, which is important for moving campers from beginner archery to advanced archery. And then once they're in advanced archery, it's important to move them from 20 yards, 25 yards, 30 yards, and on back. They have to be shooting at a certain level before they can change distances. So those are the basics of the whistle commands, the number of arrows. And so next we're going to actually show you how to shoot. So far we've talked a bit about safety, the equipment, setting up a range, but it's also important that you need to know how to shoot. And this is something that we review with the campers every single day. It's on the test that they learn, and that is the 11 steps of shooting. So I'm going to demo them for you with Band here, which is a practice tool that we have that the campers sometimes use that allows them to practice the positions without actually having an arrow on the bow. It's also good for rainy days since you can't shoot in rainy weather. And what it'll allow me to do is show you the steps, but I don't have to worry about actually shooting at anything when it's all done. So the first step is stance. You need a nice strong stance on the line. If I was on the firing line, it would be going right between my legs, and I'm planted like a tree. My feet do not move as I reach for an arrow or anything like that. They just stay like this the entire time I'm shooting. Next, you have to knock the arrow. So on the bow, there's a point called the knocking bead on the string, and there's also the arrow rest. So the arrow will go onto that point. I'll show you that when I show you with the actual bow. But you'll knock your arrow. Then you have to hook and grip. So hook and grip means that my hand with the arm guard grips the handle of the bow here, and my other hand with the finger guard goes around the string. Now, when you're hooking the string, you want the 3 fingers here in the front, and the other 2 fingers go to the back and touch each other. It actually makes the Mockingjay salute, which is one of the fun little facts about my bird name. So we have our 3 fingers in the front, our 2 to the back, we've hooked and gripped. Next, we need to check the posture and alignment. I have a nice stance. I want to be standing nice and tall with my body facing towards the target. Then I have to raise the bow. So the bow goes up. Then I'm going to draw it back. When I draw, I anchor to my face, and I anchor below the ear. There's some archers who anchor a little bit further forward or a little bit farther back. But it's important that that anchor point has to be consistent every shot, because if it's not, your arrow is going to go different places every single time. So I anchor, and then I have to transfer to hold, which what that means is my elbow right now is towards the front, and I push it back, and I put my shoulder blades together and puff my chest out. That gives me the full amount of power in my arrow. Now, when you have an actual bow, you can't hold this position very long, but with this band I can. So after I transfer to hold, I have to aim. To aim, I close my non-dominant eye, so my right eye. I look down my arrow, or if I have a sight, I'd use the sight, and I put it on the bullseye. So I'm aiming at the bullseye, I have it drawn, I've transferred to hold, I'm aiming. After that, I release. When I release, I have to let my 3 fingers go without moving my hand. And release like that. So that's release, and then follow through. I keep my hands in this position until the arrow hits the target. I hear that thunk. I can bring my arms back down. And then the last step is feedback. So I think through my shot, and if maybe it went off center, I think about why my arrow didn't hit the target. So maybe I messed up my anchor. I had it in an inconsistent point. Maybe I shifted my aim, or I did another step wrong. So that feedback step is helpful to reflect back on what you've done and know what to change the next time you shoot. And then you would repeat and go back into stance, knock, hook, grip, posture, and alignment, raise bow, draw, anchor, transfer to hold, aim, release, follow through, and feedback. And those are your 11 steps of shooting. Alright, so we've gone over the steps of shooting, and now I'm actually going to show you how to shoot. So I have my tackle on, I'm in my stance on the firing line, my arrows are here, I have my bow, the range is clear. I don't have anyone to give me whistle signals, so I'm going to go about it how someone would normally do it after they hear this single whistle blast. That means that they're allowed to start shooting. So I have my stance, I'm going to pick up my bow, knock my arrow. When I'm knocking, the odd colored feather, the guide feather, needs to be faced up, and I want to click the knock below the knocking point on the knock of the bow. So knock, knock, knock on the knocking step. Lots of knocking involved. Then I want to hook and grip. So my hand is on the handle of the bow. I have my 3 fingers, Mockingjay salute, 1 finger above, 2 below, pinky and thumb back touching each other. Once I do that, I am going to check my posture and alignment. I'm going to make sure I am standing up straight. Then I will raise my bow. I'm going to draw. I'm going to anchor. I am going to transfer to hold. I am going to aim with my dominant eye, release, and follow through. And then think about what I may have done. So in that case, I wasn't quite happy with my aim. I wasn't happy about where it went, so I'm going to adjust my aim. And I'm going to go a little bit faster this time because it does get difficult to hold a bow for a long period of time. So I'm going through all my steps. I'm still shooting a little bit high, so I'm going to drop my aim down even more. And I'm going to shoot 6 arrows. That was a better shot. So this time I'm going to aim in the same place and check if I'm being consistent in all my steps. If I am, then my arrow should go to about the same place. And that time it flew a little bit too high. So I'm going to shoot again. The last of my 6 arrows. pretty good shot. So now that I'm done shooting, I would step back after setting my bow down safely. I would step back and I would wait for permission to go and retrieve. So now that everyone's done shooting, why don't we walk out and go ahead and retrieve arrows, and I'll talk to you a little bit about scoring. Alright, so we've come out to retrieve the arrows, and the first thing I see is that I only have 5 arrows on the target. So because of one of my arrows went over, the first thing I have to do is go find it. So I know that it went slightly to the left of the target and went into the grass, and if I'm looking, it's actually right here. Now if we look at it, we can see that the feathers or the fletching is above the grass, so I'm able to pull it out backwards. If it had gone deeper in the grass and the feathers were covered, I would have to continue pulling it out in the direction the arrow was going so I don't mess up the fletching. Once I have my arrow, I have to carry it back. When we're carrying our arrows, we want to make sure that the tip or the pile is covered, and we want to hold the other end with our other hand. The reason why we do this is if we were to fall, we would fall on the flat part and not injure ourselves. If we were just holding our arrow like this and we tripped and we fell, this could go into our bodies, hurt us, or as Loon always called it, shish kebab us, and that would be a bad thing to have happen. So we always want to carry our arrows safely. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my arrow back over to the target. And once I get it to the target, I'm going to set it down. Don't lay it on the ground, but lean it against the target so that it doesn't accidentally get stepped on. And I have that arrow there. The next thing I have to do is figure out what my scoring is and remove my arrows. So when we're scoring, we start from the outer edge in the white, and it's 1, 2, black is 3 and 4, blue is 5, 6, red is 7, 8, gold or the bullseye is 9, and then 10 is this inner circle. So I'm going to pull out my arrows and score. I'm going to start from this top one, which is a 4 in the black. So I have 4, and then one slid, so I've got to pick it back up again. Have a 4 there, and then I have a 7, which makes 11. Then I have an 8, which gives me 19. Another 6, which gives me 25. And then this arrow, if you actually look closely at it, has broken the line between the 9 and the 10. So that actually gets the higher score, so it's a 10. So that gives me a score of 35. So now that I have all my arrows out, I'm going to hold the ends in this hand. I'm going to spread out my feathers so that they don't get messed up, and I'm going to walk them back, keeping them in front of me so if I were to fall, they don't accidentally go into me. And I'm going to carry them all the way back to my quiver. And I'll carefully put them back in. And then if I were a camper, I would step back from the line and wait quietly in the shade, probably have some water, and wait until it's time to shoot again. And that is how you retrieve your arrows and how you score. Alright, so I know we've covered a lot of information, and there's actually a lot more that the campers learn at camp about archery. If you're interested in having a copy of the camper manuals for beginner or advanced archery, let me know and I can send that to you. Or if you're interested in finding equipment, reach out to one of the archery staff at camp, because we can probably help you find some materials that would work for you or your camper. Couple things just to remind you about. Be careful when you're shooting to pay attention to the weather. You shouldn't be shooting when it's raining. It's bad for the equipment. But you also need to be careful not to shoot when it's super hot out. I'm down in the shade. It's a fairly cool evening. But if it's a really hot day, you need to be drinking plenty of water and not stay out in the sun too long, or you might get heat stroke or sunburn, and that wouldn't be good. Another thing to be aware about is when you're shooting, you don't want to shoot too much, because as you get tired, you risk injuring yourself and mistakes are more likely to happen. Same thing when you get frustrated. If you're frustrated, then stop shooting and come back to it later. It's part of learning the skill is learning when to stop and when it's not working anymore. One other thing that's really important to remember is you are not a movie archer. You're not Legolas, Hawkeye, Katniss, Merida. You're not any of them. So don't try doing any of the really cool stunts you see them doing in the movies. Oftentimes they have either trained professional doing it or they use CGI. It's not even real. So you have to be very careful not to do anything that could potentially result in an accident. Don't try to shoot multiple arrows. Don't try to shoot with the bow behind your back. You know, those aren't safe things to do. So learn how to shoot well, learn how to shoot accurately the way that I've shown you. And then if eventually those are skills you want to learn, go and find someone who knows how to do those things safely and learn from them. So that's about all that I have for you today, but I hope to see you all at camp in 2021. See you then.